The space station called Nexus was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy, and it floated at the meeting point of three great empires, where travelers from 100 different worlds came to trade and talk and make deals that would shape the future of entire planets. On this particular morning, a group of human cadets from the United Earth Academy walked through the main observation deck, with their eyes wide and their mouths hanging open, because most of them had never seen so many alien species in one place before. Danny Cole was 18 years old, and he walked near the back of the group, carrying a brown paper bag that held his lunch, and his friend Lucy Martinez kept teasing him about it, because she said that bringing a homemade lunch to the most advanced space station in the quadrant was the most human thing she had ever seen. Their instructor, Commander Patricia Webb, was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Heads every few minutes to make sure none of her cadets had wandered off to get into trouble. The observation deck stretched for almost a full kilometer, and its walls were made of transparent material that let everyone see the beautiful swirling colors of the nebulae outside. And Danny thought it was the most amazing thing he had ever witnessed. But something strange was happening on the deck that day, and Danny noticed it before any of his fellow cadets did. There was a section of the observation deck that was completely empty, and all the alien species were walking around it in wide circles, and some of them were actually running to get past it faster. And Danny could see fear on faces that did not look anything like human faces. But fear was fear, no matter what species you belonged to. Their guide was a Kellori named Zinth, who had 4 arms and blue skin, and a nervous way of clicking his teeth when he talked. And right now he was clicking so fast that Danny could barely understand him. Cadets, please stay close together and do not wander off. And whatever you do, please do not look directly at the Virathi observation zone. Lucy grabbed Danny by the arm and whispered to him, asking what a Virathi was, and Danny shook his head because he had no idea, but he was definitely curious now. Commander Webb gathered them all together and spoke in a low, serious voice, telling them that they were about to pass by something extraordinary and potentially dangerous, and that they needed to follow her instructions exactly. The Virathi ambassador arrived 3 days ago, she said, and no delegation from any species has been able to make contact, and several have tried, and several have failed, and one ambassador had to be carried out on a stretcher after experiencing what the doctors called psychic shock. Danny felt a chill run down his spine, but he also felt something else, and that something else was curiosity, because he wanted to know what kind of creature could make an entire space station full of advanced alien species act like scared children. They walked closer to the empty zone, and that was when Danny saw her for the first time. She was enormous and magnificent and terrifying all at once, and Danny understood immediately why everyone was afraid. The creature looked like a dragon from the old Earth stories, and she was easily 40 meters long, from her nose to the tip of her tail, and her scales were the color of deep purple mixed with black, and they seemed to shift and shimmer in the light, like the surface of a dark ocean. She had 6 eyes, arranged in 2 rows of 3, and each eye was larger than Danny himself, and they glowed with a soft golden light that seemed to contain thousands of years of wisdom and sorrow. Her wings were folded against her body, and Danny could tell that if she spread them out, they would be wide enough to block out the light from the observation deck windows. And her claws, longer than swords and sharper than anything Danny had ever seen. But the thing that struck Danny most was not her size or her claws or her terrifying appearance. It was the way she sat there all alone in that huge empty space, while hundreds of beings hurried past her without even looking in her direction. She looked lonely. Danny had seen that look before, on the faces of kids at school who sat by themselves at lunch because nobody wanted to be their friend. And he had seen it on the face of his grandmother in the nursing home when weeks went by without visitors, and he recognized it now on the face of this giant alien dragon. Zinth was still talking and clicking his teeth and explaining that the Virathi were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and that they had been isolated on their homeworld for 10,000 years, and that nobody knew why they had suddenly decided to send an ambassador to Nexus Station. Lucy whispered that she had heard rumors that the Virathi could destroy entire cities with a single breath, and that their psychic abilities were so powerful that they could kill a person just by thinking about it. Danny listened to all of this, but he kept watching the dragon, and he kept seeing that lonely look in her eyes. Some of the other cadets were taking pictures from a safe distance, and some were making nervous jokes, and some were just staring with their mouths open. But Danny was thinking about something his mother had told him once, when he was very young. She had said that the scariest-looking people were often the loneliest, because everyone was too afraid to get close to them and find out who they really were. The group moved past the empty zone, and Commander Webb let out a sigh of relief, and Zinth stopped clicking his teeth quite so fast. But Danny kept looking back over his shoulder at the giant dragon sitting alone in that vast empty space. He thought about how she had traveled across the stars to come here, and how she had been waiting for 3 days, and how not a single being had been brave enough to simply walk up and say hello. He looked down at the brown paper bag in his hands, and he thought about what his mother always said about sharing food being the first step to making friends. And Danny Cole made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He did not make this decision because he was brave, or because he wanted to be a hero, or because he thought he was special in any way. He made this decision because he saw someone who looked sad and lonely, and because his mother had raised him to be kind. He slowed his steps and let the group move ahead of him. And when he was sure that Commander Webb was not looking, he turned around and started walking back toward the empty zone. Lucy noticed, and she hissed his name, trying to get him to stop. But Danny just smiled at her and kept walking. Would happen next. He did not know if the dragon would talk to him, or ignore him, or vaporize him with her psychic powers. But he knew that somebody had to be the first one to try. And Danny Cole had always believed that somebody might as well be him. The dragon, whose name was Corvasheth, had been alive for 8,000 years, and in all that time she had never felt as alone as she did right now. She remembered the day the elders had summoned her to the great council chamber on her homeworld, and told her that she had been chosen for the most important mission in 10,000 years. The Virathi were finally ready to end their isolation and rejoin the galactic community, and they needed someone to go out into the stars and speak on behalf of their people. Corvasheth had been honored and terrified in equal measure, because she knew the history of her species, and she knew why every other civilization in the galaxy feared them. Long ago, before she was born, the Virathi had been conquerors and destroyers, and they had burned worlds and ended entire species, and their name had become a word that parents used to frighten their children into behaving. But that was 10,000 years ago, and since then, the Virathi had changed in ways that the galaxy could not imagine. They had looked at themselves, and they had felt shame for what they had done, and they had chosen to withdraw from the universe and spend their long, long lives learning how to be better. Corvasheth had grown up in a culture of contemplation and regret and hope, and she had been taught that redemption was possible for anyone who truly wanted it, and she had believed this with all of her ancient heart. But now, sitting alone on this space station, while hundreds of beings fled from her presence, she was starting to wonder if the elders had been wrong. She could feel the fear of everyone around her, because her people were telepathic, and emotions were like colors that she could see painted on the air. The fear was everywhere, and it was so thick and so heavy that it made her feel sick. She had tried everything she could think of to show them that she meant no harm. She had kept her wings folded and her claws tucked away, and she had made herself as small as a 40-meter dragon could possibly make herself. She had broadcast peaceful thoughts and feelings of friendship, but the other species could not understand her telepathy, and they interpreted it as an attack. The Morvath ambassador had been the bravest, and he had actually walked toward her with a translation device in his trembling hands. But when Corvasheth reached out with her mind to try to communicate, he had collapsed and had to be carried away by medical personnel. After that, nobody else had tried. Corvasheth understood their fear because she knew what her ancestors had done, and she knew that the galaxy had every reason to hate and fear the Virathi. But understanding did not make the loneliness any easier to bear. She thought about her homeworld, and the purple mountains, and the golden skies, and her friends and family who were waiting to hear that she had succeeded in her mission. How she would have to return to them and tell them that she had failed, and that the galaxy was not ready to forgive them after all. A deep sadness settled into her ancient bones, and she lowered her massive head and closed her 6 eyes, and tried to imagine what she would say to the elders. "I am sorry," she would tell them, "but they are still afraid, and I do not know how to make them see that we have changed." She had traveled 400 light-years across the emptiness of space, and she had carried the hopes of her entire species on her shoulders. And now she was sitting alone, on a cold metal floor, while everyone around her pretended she did not exist. This was when she noticed something strange. There was a new emotion in the air, and it was different from the fear that surrounded her everywhere else. It was small and faint, like a single candle in a dark room, but it was definitely there, and it was coming closer. Corvasheth opened her eyes and turned her head toward the source of this new feeling. She saw a human walking toward her. It was a young one, barely more than a child by human standards, and he was carrying something in his hands, and his heart was beating fast with fear. But there was something else there too. Curiosity, wonder, and underneath it all, like a warm fire on a cold night, there was kindness. Corvasheth had lived for 8,000 years, and she had seen empires rise and fall, and she had witnessed the birth and death of stars. But she had never seen anything quite like this. A human child was walking toward her, without weapons, or armor, or any kind of protection, and he was not running away, even though his body was screaming at him to run. He was afraid, but he was coming anyway. She watched him cross the invisible barrier that everyone else avoided, and she saw the security drones swoop toward him, and she made them stop, with a gentle push of her mind, because she wanted to see what this small creature would do. He kept walking, and with every step, the kindness in his heart seemed to grow stronger and stronger. Corvasheth did not move, because she did not want to frighten him, and she did not reach out with her mind, because she was afraid of hurting him, like she had hurt the Morvath ambassador. She just waited and watched as this impossible little being walked right up to her, and stopped, and looked up at her with eyes that held no hatred, and no memory of ancient wars, and no 10,000 years of fear. He looked at her like she was just another person who might want to be friends. And for the first time since arriving at Nexus Station, Corvasheth felt something that she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. Danny stood in front of the giant dragon, and his legs were shaking so badly that he thought he might fall down. She was even bigger up close, and each of her scales was larger than his entire head, and her eyes were like pools of liquid gold that seemed to go on forever. He could hear Commander Webb shouting his name from somewhere behind him, and he could hear Lucy calling out to him, and he could hear Zinth making those clicking sounds faster than ever before. But Danny did not look back, because he was afraid that if he looked back, he would lose his courage and run away. So instead he looked up at the dragon, and he took a deep breath, and he said the first thing that came into his mind. "Hi." His voice came out smaller and squeakier than he wanted it to, and he felt embarrassed, so he cleared his throat and tried again. Hi there, and I am Danny, and I noticed you have been sitting here by yourself for a while, and that seemed kind of lonely. Did not move, and her 6 golden eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Danny felt something brush against the edge of his thoughts, like someone knocking very gently on a door. And it was strange, but it did not hurt, and somehow he understood that she was asking permission to come in. He did not know how to respond to that, so he just kept talking, because talking was the only thing he knew how to do when he was nervous. I brought my lunch with me today because my mom packed it for me this morning, and she always makes way too much food because she worries that I am not eating enough. He held up the brown paper bag, and the dragon's eyes moved to look at it. My mom says that sharing food is the first step to making friends, and I thought maybe you would like some, even though I do not know if you eat the same things that humans eat. Behind him, Danny could hear more voices now, and they were getting closer. Footsteps of security personnel, and he knew that they were coming to drag him away. But the dragon moved first. She lowered her massive head slowly and carefully until one of her golden eyes was level with Danny's face, and she was so close that he could feel the warmth radiating from her scales. And then something happened that Danny would remember for the rest of his life. A voice appeared in his mind, and it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not words exactly, but more like feelings and images and meanings that somehow translated themselves into something he could understand. "Little one," the voice said, and it was ancient and powerful, but also gentle in a way that surprised him. "You approach me without deception, and without the kind of fear that consumes everything else, and I must ask you why you do this." Danny blinked, and he realized that the dragon was talking to him inside his head, and he should probably have been terrified. But instead, he felt a strange sense of calm. "I came over because you looked sad," he said out loud, because he did not know how to talk back with his mind. "And my mom always says that nobody should have to be sad alone." The dragon was quiet for a moment, and Danny could feel her presence in his thoughts, like a warm blanket wrapped around his mind. "Your mother sounds like a wise person," she said. "She is," Danny agreed, "and she is also a really good cook, which is why I wanted to share my lunch with you." He opened the paper bag and pulled out the sandwich that his mother had made for him that morning. "It is peanut butter and jelly," he explained, "and peanut butter is made from these little things called peanuts that grow in the ground, and you mash them up into a paste, and jelly is made from fruit, and you put them together between 2 pieces of bread, and it is really good." The dragon leaned even closer, and Danny could see his own reflection in her enormous golden eye. "Tell me more about this peanut butter," she said, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. Danny smiled, because this was something he could do, and this was something that made sense. "Well, you have to be careful, because some people are allergic to peanuts, and it can make them really sick. But if you are not allergic, then it is one of the best things ever." He kept talking, and the dragon kept listening. And somewhere behind him, Danny heard Commander Webb ordering the security personnel to stand down, because it was clear that the boy was not in any immediate danger. Danny did not notice any of this, because he was too busy explaining the difference between creamy peanut butter and chunky peanut butter. And the dragon was asking questions, and for the first time since she arrived at Nexus Station, she did not feel alone. And Danny did not feel afraid anymore, because it turned out that the scariest-looking creature in the galaxy was actually just someone who wanted to talk, and who had been waiting for 3 days for anyone to give her a chance. He pulled out the rest of his lunch, and showed her the apple, and the cookies, and the little bag of chips, and he explained what each one was, and where it came from. And Corvasheth the ancient dragon, who had traveled across 400 light-years of empty space, listened to every word with the kind of attention that she had not given to anything in thousands of years. Because this human child had done something that no diplomat or ambassador or warrior had managed to do. He had simply walked up to her and offered to share his lunch. And that small act of kindness was worth more than all the treaties and negotiations in the galaxy. 3 hours had passed since Danny first walked into the empty zone, and now it was not empty anymore. Word had spread through Nexus Station that a human child was talking to the Virathi ambassador, and beings from dozens of species had gathered at the edge of the observation zone to watch. Commander Webb had tried twice to pull Danny away, and both times Corvuseth had made it very clear, in her gentle but firm way, that the boy was her guest and would leave when he chose to. The commander was a smart woman, and she knew when to push and when to step back, so she had established a security perimeter and sent urgent messages to Earth Command. And then she had simply waited to see what would happen next. Danny sat cross-legged on the floor, in front of the enormous dragon, and he had been talking for so long that his throat was getting sore. But he did not want to stop, because Corvuseth kept asking questions, and she seemed genuinely interested in everything he had to say. He had told her about Earth, and about his home in a small town in Colorado, and about his mother, who worked as a nurse, and his father who had died when Danny was young. He had told her about the United Earth Academy, and how he had always dreamed of traveling to the stars, and about Lucy, who was his best friend, and who was probably very worried about him right now. And Corvuseth had listened to all of it, and she had shared things too. She told him about her homeworld, with its purple mountains and golden skies, and about her people, who had once been terrible, and who had spent 10,000 years trying to be better. She told him about the Great Silence, when the Virathi had cut themselves off from the galaxy, and about the elders who had chosen her to be the one to finally reach out again. And she told him about the loneliness that she had felt for the past 3 days, as being after being had fled from her presence, without giving her a chance to explain why. She had come. Danny listened to her story, and his young heart ached for her, because he understood what it felt like to be judged for things that were not your fault. "My grandpa did some bad stuff when he was young," Danny said, "and he does not like to talk about it, but I know that he hurt people." Corvuseth tilted her massive head, and her golden eyes focused on him with curiosity. "And how does your grandfather deal with this burden?" she asked. Danny thought about it for a moment before answering. "He tries to be good now, and he helps people whenever he can. And my mom says that trying to be better is the bravest thing anyone can do." He paused, and then added something that his mother had told him many times. "She also says that the past does not have to be a cage unless you let it." Corvuseth was silent for a long time, and Danny could feel something shifting in her ancient mind, like clouds parting after a storm. "Your species is very young," she said finally. Danny nodded, because this was something that every alien species seemed to say about humans. "That is what everyone keeps telling us. Perhaps that is why you can do what others cannot," Corvuseth said, and her voice in his mind was filled with wonder. Danny did not understand what she meant, so he asked her to explain. "You have not yet learned that some walls cannot be broken down," she said, "and you have not yet learned that some distances are too far to cross. So you simply break down the walls anyway, and you cross the distances anyway, because nobody ever told you that it was impossible." She raised her head and looked out at the crowd of beings gathered at the edge of the zone, and Danny turned to look too. There were hundreds of them now, and they were watching with expressions of fear and confusion, and something else that Danny could not quite identify. "You walked up to me without hesitation," Corvuseth continued, "and you offered me your lunch, because you thought I looked lonely, and you did not care that I am a monster from the old stories, and you did not care that everyone else was afraid. You just saw someone who needed a friend, and you decided to be that friend." Danny felt his cheeks get hot, because he was not used to being praised like this. "I did not really think about it that much," he admitted, "and I just did what felt right." Corvuseth made a sound that Danny realized was laughter, and it echoed through his mind like bells ringing in a cathedral. "That," she said, "is exactly what makes your species so remarkable." She looked at him with all 6 of her golden eyes, and Danny felt the warmth of her regard wash over him like sunshine. "You do not overthink kindness," she said, "and you do not calculate the risks of compassion. You simply act from your hearts and hope for the best." Danny shrugged, because he still did not think he had done anything special. "Is that not what everyone does?" he asked. "No, little one," Corvuseth said, and her voice was sad and hopeful at the same time. "It is not what everyone does, but perhaps it is what everyone should do." She turned her gaze back to the watching crowd, and Danny could see that something had changed in the way they were looking at her. The fear was still there, but now there was something else mixed in with it. Curiosity. And maybe just a little bit of hope. Corvuseth rose to her full height, and her scales caught the light from the nebulae outside and scattered it in 1,000 different directions. Danny scrambled to his feet beside her, and he suddenly felt very small, standing next to this magnificent creature. But he did not feel afraid anymore. The crowd at the edge of the zone fell completely silent, as the dragon spread her wings for the first time since arriving at the station, and they stretched out on either side of her like great purple sails. She was beautiful and terrible and ancient beyond human understanding, but Danny looked up at her and saw only his friend. Corvuseth turned her attention to the gathered beings, and when she spoke, her voice reached out to touch every mind in the observation deck. "I am Corvuseth of the Varathi," she said, "and I came to this place to begin healing the wounds that my people caused long ago." She paused, and Danny could feel the weight of 10,000 years of regret in her thoughts. "For 3 days I sat here alone, because everyone was too afraid to approach me, and I began to believe that the gulf between my people and the rest of the galaxy was too wide to ever be crossed. But then this human child walked up to me and offered me his lunch because he thought I looked lonely." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd, and Danny felt hundreds of alien eyes turned toward him. "He had done nothing special," Corvuseth continued, "and he had no weapons or armor or protection, and he was afraid, but he came anyway because his mother taught him that sharing food is the first step to making friends." She lowered her head toward Danny, and her golden eyes were soft with affection. "He reminded me of something that I had forgotten in all my thousands of years of life. Kindness does not require courage or strength or wisdom. Kindness only requires the willingness to see another being as worthy of care." Out, and Danny could feel the tension in the air as hundreds of beings tried to process what they were hearing. Then something wonderful happened. Lucy Martinez stepped forward from the crowd, and she was shaking with fear, but she walked right up to the edge of the zone, and she looked at Danny, and then she looked at Corvuseth. "Is it true?" she asked, and her voice was trembling, but she did not run away. "Is it true that you just want to be friends?" Corvuseth turned her ancient gaze toward the young human woman, and she smiled in a way that dragons smile. "It is true," she said, "and we have been alone for so long, and we want nothing more than the chance to show that we have changed." Lucy took a deep breath, and then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped into the zone and walked over to stand beside Danny. "Well," she said, and her voice was stronger now, "if Danny trusts you, then I trust you too." When the dam broke, Zinth the Kalori guide came forward next, with his forearms waving nervously, but his feet carrying him into the zone anyway. And then a Morvath diplomat followed, and then a group of human tourists, and then beings from species that Danny did not even recognize. They came slowly at first, and then faster and faster, until the empty zone was not empty anymore. Commander Webb stood at the edge and watched with tears in her eyes as her cadets mingled with aliens from a dozen different worlds, all gathered around a giant dragon who was laughing in their minds and answering their questions and thanking them for giving her a chance. Danny felt a hand on his shoulder, and he looked up to see Corvuseth gazing down at him. "You did this," she said, and her voice was filled with wonder. "You changed everything with a sandwich and a kind heart." Danny shook his head, because he still did not think he had done anything special. "My lunch," he said. Korvashev laughed again, and the sound of it filled the observation deck with warmth. "And that," she said, "is exactly why your species will go further than any other. You do not understand how rare kindness is in this universe, and so you give it freely, without expecting anything in return." She spread her wings wide, and her voice reached out to everyone on the deck. "The Virathi wish to announce that we are formally requesting to establish diplomatic relations with the United Earth government." She paused and looked at Danny with all 6 of her golden eyes. "And we would like to name Danny Cole as our first official friend among the human species." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Danny felt his face turn red, but he was smiling so hard that his cheeks hurt. Lucy threw her arms around him and hugged him tight, and even Commander Webb was laughing and shaking her head in disbelief. Later that night, after all the care, excitement had died down. Danny sat alone with Korvashev in her quarters, which were much larger than any other quarters on the station. He was tired and happy, and still a little bit amazed at everything that had happened. "Korvashev," he said, and she turned her head to look at him. "Do you really think that humans are special because we are kind?" She considered his question for a long moment before answering. "I think," she said, "that kindness is the rarest and most powerful force in the universe, and I think that your species has more of it than any other species I have ever encountered." Danny thought about this, and then he smiled. "My mom is going to be really happy when I tell her that her sandwich helped save the galaxy." Korvashev laughed once more, and the sound of it echoed through the station like music. "Tell your mother," she said, "that the Virathi owe her a debt that can never be repaid. And tell her that if she ever needs anything, at all, she has only to ask." Danny promised that he would, and then he yawned because it had been a very long day. He fell asleep right there on the floor of the dragon's quarters, and Korvashev watched over him all through the night like a guardian from the old stories. And somewhere out in the stars, the news was already spreading. A human child had befriended a dragon, and the galaxy would never be the same again.